This is Health Unfiltered, the podcast where we cut through the bullshit and get honest about fitness, nutrition, and mental wellness.
Alan, welcome. How's it going?
Oh, it is fantastic. We have the holidays, right? So things are
Oh,
great.
yeah, definitely. I'm really excited. And today we have with us our co-host, Brandon Morris. Welcome, Brandon.
How's it going, guys?
Going great.
Fantastic.
So in this episode, we'll be discussing psychedelic assisted therapy, navigating the healthcare system, and employee benefits. But before we get into the topic, Alan, I really want to know your origin story, like where you grew up and how you got to
Yeah,
where you are now. Can you fill us in?
absolutely. So I grew up in Michigan till about the sixth or seventh grade. My mom and dad found Jesus, as I like to joke, and they decided to go to Dallas, and we sold everything we owned, and my dad and my mom went to Bible college. I grew up in a very conservative, when I say very conservative Christian home. And after Bible college, my dad owned an HVAC company. I graduated a year early. I was 17, not very mature. So what do? You go to Bible college because, right, that's like what you do. So I went to Bible college for a year. I didn't really prescribe to all of the beliefs. I had a lot of questions. And there were a lot of things that I couldn't get answered. Like there were just a lot of things that didn't make sense to me with God. And I decided I wanted to walk away. So I did. I went to the military. So I spent 4 years on active duty, Persian Gulf, all kind of happened. I was there for 4 years, got out. I went to college, met the woman of my dreams. I went back in the military during this time in the reserve. So I spent 8 years in the reserve. So 12 years total. About the time the second Gulf War was coming back, I said, it's not my thing. I had gotten into the employee benefit space. I worked for health insurance companies, and that was kind of all I did when I got out of college. I went to work for a TPA, which is basically a builder of health plans. So instead of going to Blue Cross, United, Cigna, and Aetna, you go to one of these guys, and we kind of build the plan for you, and you keep all your money. So I did that. I was very, very successful at that. I married the woman of my dreams from college, and life kind of continued to happen. And I had a lot of dark secrets. So while I was growing, I had a lot of trauma from childhood. I was sexually abused when I was a child. I didn't tell anyone until about 4 years ago. So I'm in the middle of burning my life to the ground. I have everything the world could possibly want. I mean, from the outside, it's like, man, this guy, like, he really won the lottery. He did everything. But inside, I would lay in bed at night thinking of ways to kill myself. Like, it was just like it was like that. So I had some friends that I was in a mastermind with that were telling me about these psychedelic experiences that they were doing, and I said, "There's no way I'm doing that. It's not God. It's drugs. It's all the stuff." Then my doctor actually said to me, bro, like he'd been there. He's like, I think you need to rethink your thinking. That I give you drugs every month from a lab. I have zero idea where they come from. And this is stuff God made from the ground. So I didn't have an argument for that. So I went home, and now my wife is telling me she loves me, but she's not in love with me because who would love someone who doesn't love themselves? So it was a really dark, hard time a few years ago. And we made the decision to go to this retreat together. And if you ask her, she'll tell you I didn't ask. Kind of dragged her along. Not how I remember it, but I reconnected with parts of myself. I revisited my trauma. I healed my abuser. I got to relive all these things, and I got to redo things. So, during this time, we had sold our company. I had decided that I wanted to get into something else. So when you get healing, I guess is what you call it, or awakened, you want to go back and help other people. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. So I started a company called Neuma, which means spirit, breath, soul. And I'm going to be revolutionizing mental health.
That's amazing. That's really incredible, the journey that you've been on to come this far and all that success that you had, but you were just feeling, these past traumas that were still holding you back, and then to be able to come through that on the other side, it's really incredible.
Yeah, I see it a lot with men. I feel like we're told that we have to be these strong masculine, and I kind of feel like I see it more now more than ever. It's almost like muscular
Mm.
Jesus. It's like all these alpha males. It's like the thing right now.
Yeah.
And and I saw a post from somebody. If you ever look at the alpha wolf is never the one that's in the front. He's in the back, making sure that everyone is up to speed, that no one gets left behind. But we have
Hmm.
this image. So it's been really fascinating for me being in a lot of these muscular Jesus groups that it really isn't about that. It's more about serving,
Yeah.
which is why I'm
Yeah.
excited about like the direction I'm going.
Definitely. So on this trip that you and your wife went on,
Yeah.
what did that entail?
So I actually wrote a book called Walking in the Garden: Discovering God Through Psychedelics, and I did a lot of research. Like if you go out and you look at psychedelic research, Michael Pollan wrote a book, How to Change Your Mind. He was a New
Hmm.
York Times bestselling author who decided that he was going to go and try all these things. Again, I had no idea about any of this. Being in a Christian home, being in the military, I had zero experience with drugs, like zero. And when I went, I asked what it was, and they really wouldn't tell me. So it was a trust thing. So it really was.
Yeah.
So I go into this experience. My wife is in a completely different room. I immediately fall onto this Aztec temple. I'm half Hispanic, so I see this lush green garden. I see this connection, and she's standing next to me. And then I proceed to go back and I relive my trauma. Like the great thing about psychedelics, and depending on which one it is that you go and revisit. It's not like you're actually reliving. It's almost like you're eating popcorn and watching a movie. But at any time, you can
Mm.
kind of change the channel if you want. So I did. I relived a lot of things that I had experienced. I was 4 and I saw a fight with my mom and dad that I didn't know had a huge impact on everything I ever thought about success. Like that one argument that my dad had bounced a check. And subconsciously, my whole life, I never wanted that. And I was always going to be successful, but I didn't know why. So I
Mm.
uncover all of this stuff, but my wife is in the other room dealing with her stuff. She's got some trauma from growing up. And the crazy thing was, she was guiding me in mind. Like she would show up in mind when it got really rough, and she would lead me through. And there was one point where I actually found my heart, and I've actually said, "There you are. I haven't seen you in such a long time." And I picked it up and I held it. It blossomed in a clover.
Wow.
And then there were like other parts of the journey where just some things had happened that I was able to kind of revisit and to heal, which was a really cool part about that. It's that the great thing about what I see today is because I work with a lot of other men who are looking for healing, and it's all underground, and there's a lot of conversations around whether it's legal, not legal, and then we can get into the whole legal argument of why it's not under
Hmm.
Nixon and in the 70s. But the reality is, people are desperately searching for healing, and this heals. So, so for me, it was MDMA and ketamine was actually what I was on. I've done
Hmm.
10 different experiences in the last year. I just was in a ceremony a month ago where I was just psilocybin with 18 other people and just saw some incredible things. So a lot of what I do now is I lead other businessmen in psilocybin, and we do a lot of business planning free of ego.
Hmm.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's so I mean this is a huge space and this is really gaining a lot of momentum. And so I absolutely love this conversation. That's interesting. So you went to a retreat and so your first experience was MDMA and ketamine, which
Yeah.
induced this psychedelic trip. I mean, it's so amazing to think because a lot of times whenever I try to help people, it's like an onion, and so we live on this surface layer and, we go to a doctor and they prescribe us these medications, these chemicals or whatever, and they try to suppress our symptoms in various ways. And a lot of times, they're poisoning us. But even in therapy as well, it's really hard to get down to that nitty gritty. And so it almost feels like these psychedelics are just allowing us to kind of approach ourselves almost like the fast track, and so you can have this one experience. And I know for a lot of people, it can take multiple,
Yeah.
but for some, it can take the first one. Um, but yeah, that's so amazing to hear. the experience, especially, I mean, because psilocybin is really gaining a lot of traction. In a lot of states, they're starting to approve the pharmaceutical application of psilocybin in like therapy sessions and stuff, which is
Yeah, I
really
mean, right
cool.
now, I mean, if you look at if you look at all over the world, there's 240 different clinical trials going on in psychedelics for everything from general depression, menopause. I mean, 240 across the world. And right now we have about 11 states who are looking at different legislation. We have, I mean, right now, Colorado and Oregon are two that are legal with some parameters around it. I live in Maryland. I was involved in a lot of the decrim stuff for the state of Maryland. Our governor actually signed a bill where we're evaluating psychedelics over the next year, specifically psilocybin, because it is, you know, a grow in the ground. But yeah, it's interesting. But I always tell everyone, and I did an episode of my own podcast I have called Neuma, the Crossroad of Science and Enlightenment, and I had a guest on. We were talking about microdosing, and we call them magic mushrooms. There's nothing magic about the mushroom. There really isn't. It allows you. You're the magic. You're the one that actually has to do the work, though. So, you know, a lot of the peeling back the onion, Brandon, that you're talking about is what we would call integration. So, what do you learn from the lessons that the medicine was telling you? And I had someone I worked with this week, and it was so. This is so timely that you said this. So, same doctor, 20 years, psychologist, psychotherapist, 5 prescriptions, and he still hasn't been able to get past whatever it was. So we've been working together for the first 4 months of just what is the intention? What's the preparation around it? Because they're not for everyone. If you've got some family history, if you've got some schizophrenia, some bipolar, they're not for you. So there is a whole screening process. But yesterday when we were done, he said to me in tears, "You gave me a smile for Christmas." I didn't give him any. The little saints, the medicine did. But now we have to spend the next 4 months just unpacking what it was that the medicine and what the voices and God were trying to tell him all the way. But he went back to a 3-year-old, and I heard the conversation, and I was able to take notes and listen. So the onion, you're exactly right. You're able to, I hate using the word hack. You're able to bypass all of the ego, and you're able to lower that default mode network. You're able to get to the root of whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, the, integration and thinking about all this, it makes me think of like Carl Rogers or Carl Jung, and how he actually induced a schizophrenic state to try to integrate and go to a deeper level. And so he had locked
Mhm.
himself into a room and induced the schizophrenia to try to get to know his dark side, And so he was really
Mhm.
big on, like, in order to be whole, you have to recognize the shadow and you have to be able to see the shadow,
Uh,
that we're both good and bad, everybody.
yeah,
And
I love
so,
the archetype. It's yeah, I mean, Carl a lot, and I have a lot of friends who are huge followers of Carl Jung and the archetype because in every one of us there is that archetype, and then
oh
you
yeah.
have to, kind of circle back on that shadow work, and you have to ask, like, so the people who come into your life, everyone comes into your life for a reason and for a season. They do. They're whether they're there to teach you something, bring you back to something. It's our job to remember. Why are we here? What is the lesson that we're learning? And we can get into the whole, is this our first time here? Is there other times here? I'm a big believer, and I tell my kids, this isn't our first go around. I truly believe that we've all come back in some form to learn something different. That doesn't really bode well with my Christian background, because I'm still deeply connected to Christianity and deeply a follower of the way. But at the same time, this can't be it. I mean, it can't be. So what is the lesson? And I think with some of that, what I've kind of come to terms with is, like, when I revisited my trauma, I went back to the room 3 times. And the third time, he was actually sitting on the bed crying, and he was apologizing to me for what had happened. And he had told me that it was done to him. So now I have a reframe of how I thought about him for 48 years, because he's just repeating the cycle. And I actually called him, which is the craziest thing. I found him after 48 years driving down the road, and I heard a voice say, "You know what you have to do." And I asked what that was, and they said, "You need to find and call him." And I said, "There's no way I'm doing that." After 48 years, I found him, and he told me that it was done to him. And I told him that I knew that because he'd already told me.
So is this in combination with therapy? Like, do you put people into like a, like a month long or multi-month long
Yes.
therapy? Okay.
Yeah. So for me, I think that's one of the things that a very responsible facilitator would do. So when we have these experiences, again, it's the integration. What is the lesson that you learned? But how do we apply that to our daily lives? So where I am somewhat unique, I actually have people record their own transcripts. So when you're in medicine, I want you talking. I'm there to guide in case there's some difficult parts, but I want you to be able to hear and experience because then we're going to type word for word every every o, every period. We're going to type it all, and then we're going to sit down over the next 4 months. We're going to go through everything. Like, what does it mean? And then we make note cards of things that we need to work on this week. But for me, I do a 4 month process and we meet every week. Some people are a couple of calls, some people are group settings. So it really depends on what it is. And then it really depends on what is the trauma. Like I've worked with first responders, I've worked with other veterans, I've worked with other sexual abuse, which has been, I think, great for me. Kind of going back to that shadow work. In order to move forward, you almost have to take a step back and you almost have to look at it like that. Like, you know, when you look at a boomerang, it has to go repel in order to go forward. So that's really what it is. It's just doing the constant work every day with the lessons that you learn.
Yeah,
What do
this really
these
makes me
sessions
think
look
and
like?
so I had mentioned Carl Rogers already. It makes me think of like he wrote a book called on becoming a person or something like that, where he went through these therapy sessions sitting with people, and he was humanistic psychologist, or at least that was the school that he subscribed to, or the practice, and it was all about fostering this environment where people could meet themselves. And so it kind of makes me wonder, like, when people have this experience, is that a common issue you have where people may have a certain experience around something, but then you kind of have to foster that environment to where they're even willing to accept what they saw?
Yes.
Or yeah.
Yeah, and I really think again, I mean, we can get into each medicine and what they all do and the backstory of all of those. And for me, MDMA is really good for complex trauma. I mean, it's really good. And I always kind of equate it to like a cup of hot chocolate. It's super loving, it's super warm, and it really allows you to revisit complex trauma with the ability, like I said before, to kind of watch and you're able to kind of go into it, but then you're able to take the experiences and just like talk about those on a weekly or, you know, and again, it's the constant doing of the work, sitting down and journaling every morning. What's the feeling? What's the thought around the feeling? And there's an author, her name is Byron Katie. She has a process called the work. And it really, that process of getting your brain to kind of walk around the block of whatever it is you're thinking because whatever the story is, like I tell my 8 and 10-year-old, the story is never the story. It's always something different. And it's getting into that. It's why am I telling myself that? And then you kind of get into that conversation kind of happens with everyone. As we're talking, I can kind of dissect the conversation while we're talking. And it's not always the fun thing to do. I love to be engaged in the conversation, but there are certain things I pick up on where I kind of want to know more about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
I
those
want to know more
motivations.
about these sessions and how they work.
Yeah.
Are people laying down while they're doing this? Do they have their eyes closed? Is there music playing? And
It could be a number of different things. So yeah, so
mhm.
I've actually been in ceremonies where, like I said before, I've had 14, 18 people in a gigantic room where it's been live music and the energy just flows with the spirit of the room. I've been in ceremony where I'm not exaggerating, you feel the energy of the room. You feel the light and the dark, you feel the trauma and the happy, you feel the joy and the pain, and you really connect with each other's pain, and you're all doing the work. What's so beautiful about that, I took off my mask. Normally, mask and headphones. If I'm working with a group or working one on one with someone, they have an eye mask. They're listening to music. I have a curated playlist. But there are times when you feel that energy and I remember I was sitting up and I was just looking around the room and the feeling that came over me was all of it, good, bad, right, wrong, happy, sad, trauma, pain. It's all the celebration of the human experience. And if
Yeah.
we could all look at it like that, I know in the moment it's super hard. Like we're like,
Mm.
what the hell am I doing here? Am I ever going to get out of this? And it's always so temporary. I mean, this world and this life is so short.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I mean, so when you're working with clients, are you typically using um like psilocybin mushrooms or
It could depend. Again, it could be if I'm working with a child sexual trauma survivor like I was, it could be MDMA. If it
yeah.
was someone else and we have a baseline already and we're kind of, we're moving down, psilocybin is my favorite. For me,
Hmm.
it's connection to the earth. It's
Yeah.
grown in the earth. It grows roots, which is what we all do together as we're kind of talking. So as we all kind of grow
Hmm.
roots together. But that's probably my favorite.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So is it more of a like a macro dose or like a heroic
It
dose? Like
is. So a lot of people will do it a lot of different ways. So I like to dose up. So again, a lot of what we do in this work, and it's humorous because I talk to a lot of people who have this experience. They've had psychedelic experiences before. It usually is. I had a friend in college and we tripped out at it's always on top of a building. Like I don't ever understand that. Or like we go out in the woods. So it's like,
Mhm.
but it was never like, or we were at a party. So the intention and the preparation were never really there. So when
Yeah.
you prepare and when you spend weeks or months kind of going through what is it I'm trying to get out? Like, what is it that I need to come out? It's always different than just kind of like going on a trip. So this is the beginning of a journey. So it really, there's this whole preparation and tension that kind of happens beforehand. And then we have a really good idea. Like we've gone through this intake, and responsible people will look at medical history. They'll look at the psychological, and all that will kind of determine which medication or which medicine or what we call sacrament they would work with.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah. About a year ago, I was dealing with some stuff and I needed a reset and I took a little more than a macro dose, like a medium dose, and I just laid down in bed and just closed my eyes and put on some music, and it was really crazy how that journey took me, back to my past, and I was able to remember, some things that I had forgotten in my past, and it really was so helpful just to be able to remember and to kind of relive some of that stuff.
Oh, I
But
love that.
I've always been interested in doing more of a guided session where there's someone like you kind of facilitating it. Um, a lot of people have a negative, thought about, psychedelic
Yeah.
magic mushrooms, just because of the stigma in the past, but it can be so healing and so helpful. How does the, therapeutic use of mushrooms differ from like recreational use?
So again, I think it really comes down to the intention. We're at a really interesting time in this space right now, especially in the U.S. and being a Western. We're so heavily focused on science. So there's this intersection of what we would call, and I took the term from Michael Pollan, white coat shamanism is what he likes to call it. So
Mm,
we're very focused on science in the U.S. We don't like the ceremonial conversation. I don't know if it's because of the separation of church and state thing, and we can't have enlightenment and science in the same intersection. But I think that's where we are right now, and I think such an amazing time to be alive to be able to kind of watch this intersection. So there's like we said before, there's 240 different trials all over the world that are being done. There's amazing companies like Cybin and MindMed and Lycos who are taking these applications and they're actually bringing them to clinical utilization. So Cybin actually has created a synthetic psilocybin, a magic mushroom. So they just announced a week ago that in their second clinical trial, 71% of the people who took the synthetic psilocybin depression free after the first
wow.
Wow.
time. But now 12 months later, 100% are still depression.
Wow.
Can't argue
So
with that. And when you
amazing.
look at that and you look at the SSRIs, the serotonin inhibitors that are
Mm.
there right now, we talked about it. One of my clients, 5 drugs over the last 20 years. And he said to me, all I got were drugs and coping skills that don't work. So to
Yeah.
get a gift for Christmas of a smile, like I left in tears. Like it's not me. I'm just the one who's just kind of helping along the journey.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder with, especially with the use of psilocybin, what kind of impact it has on your bacterial environment.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine, because the bacteria is the relationship between our brain and our thought process and our immune system is all interrelated with our bacterial environment as well. And that's really where most of, like they say, I think it's like 80% of our serotonin is created by our bacteria.
Correct.
And so I wonder what kind of transition you're having while in the trip, but then also from taking the substance as well, which is probably having these long-term impacts, because having this experience, facing your trauma, finding those motivations underneath everything, peeling back those layers, and one of the things that I know that there probably is already work on this, but addiction is a really big space for this.
Yeah.
And yeah, I could see just because a lot of times, you fall into those psychoses and addiction where you feel like you're trapped, and so going through something like this could really help to kind of change. But I wonder, has there been any research on the impact of the bacterial environment?
There actually has, and the more research that we're doing right now is uncovering so many more things. So there was a study done, and you can go to Beckley Waves and actually see it, and they're referring to the Nature.com or Nature study that describes exactly what you're talking about, Brian. And so if you think about life and you think about what you do every day, 95% of your thoughts are going to automatically happen whether you like it or not, because your brain is already wired. The way the brain works is it's basically a filing system. So within a nanosecond of you looking at something, it goes back into your brain, it looks in the filing cabinet, and puts a point of reference to something. It takes a thought and it creates a 3D image of it. So that's what it does. But if you are reliving the same thoughts every day, again, 5% of your thoughts are actually going to be conscious thoughts where you make a decision that are beyond the 60 to 70,000 that you have. So just imagine you have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day that are automatic. Doesn't matter. By the time you're 9 years old, they're already being formed. And by the time you're 20, they're done. It's just going to happen. But now the cool thing about psilocybin, and you just alluded to it, is that it creates new neural pathways. So it's almost like a Zamboni on your brain. So I was taking my kids ice skating the other day, and we came off the ice, and Zamboni came out, and it puts fresh water down on the ice. Now all the rivets and the divots and all of the rough all go away, all smoothed out. That's what psilocybin does. That's what psychedelics do, that they rewire the brain with these new neural pathways, and you now have the ability to recreate new habits, new thought patterns, and everything else, which is why integration is so important. There is this window of opportunity where you now get to completely change how you think. And that's really kind of where I took my next company, is where I got the idea.
And so do they see like accelerated dendrite growth
They
within the
do.
brain through this
They
as
do. They've
well?
actually been able to. There was a scientist this summer who actually took psilocybin, went into an MRI machine, and showed the actual creation of new neural pathways.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see where this goes. What are some of the biggest like protestations towards this, like that you face when you're trying to maybe convince somebody to do this, or
Yeah.
because I know like Josh has already mentioned, there's a stigma around it. A lot of people
Yeah.
see this as a recreational drug, and so people who could hugely benefit from this aren't going to be willing to take it.
It's people like me.
This episode is brought to you by the Protein Lifestyle Cookbook. Say goodbye to fad diets and hello to sustainable results with the Protein Lifestyle Cookbook. Packed with delicious, high protein recipes designed to fuel your body and mind, this book is your ultimate guide to healthier eating. Whether you're looking to lose weight without starving yourself or build lean muscle mass, this cookbook has you covered. What makes it different? I'm glad you asked. It's not just another recipe book. This is a lifestyle roadmap combining science-backed nutrition tips with easy-to-follow dishes that fit your busy schedule. From braised beef with a red wine reduction to chocolate peanut butter protein bars, every recipe is crafted to help you stay full and achieve your health goals. Order your copy on Amazon today and take the first step towards a stronger, healthier you. The Protein Lifestyle Cookbook, changing lives one meal at a time.
You have these stories, this programming that normally they're drugs. In what I find kind of funny, again, I'm 55 years old. I historically go back and I reference war on drugs. So growing up for me, we used to have these commercials. There was a frying pan and there was an egg, and they would throw it into the frying pan. It was like, tsh, it was like, this
I
is your
remember that
brain. This
one.
is your brain. Remember that? So this is your brain on
Mhm.
drugs. We have been programmed that all drugs are bad, which totally fine. Like, again, you have to go back and historically look at why. So when you look at the 60s, and if you actually go back and do the research, I live in Maryland in Baltimore. This was ground zero for the research. Johns Hopkins Psychedelic Institute. There were a number of amazing companies here and labs that were doing all of this work. We knew back in the 60s that this was healing people. But when you have a war like Vietnam, you have a war of counterculture, and you have a war of the rising of African Americans like Black Panthers. The only way to declare, or the only way to control a population is to declare war on the things that they're doing, which is why Nixon did it. So Nixon actually declared war on drugs because he needed to control the narrative and the population of the people who were doing it. So
Yeah, it's so
a lot of what we
interesting.
talk about here is kind of the historical why. Like, why were they declared a Schedule One when we knew all along that these were healing people? That we had the research to prove it, and then overnight, all the research gone. Like, it was all gone. So now we're kind of reinventing or rediscovering all of the stuff that we knew already in the 60s.
And I wonder how much of that is just profiteering by the pharmaceutical companies as well. Because I mean, you ideally, if you're Pfizer or any of these large chemical companies, you want to create a product that you can control.
Yeah,
You want
patented.
to have a patent on it. You don't want to easily replicate it. And so, being the capitalist country that we are, we normally lean towards making things that are easily accessible, hard to reach, or not well utilized,
And
because you see that a lot in like the natural supplement space as well,
yeah,
where like
Mm.
one of the things that I, talk to Josh and a lot of my friends about is like the use of saffron. Now, saffron has just so many benefits to it, and I was just reading this research the other day on it, and it really is crazy. But all this stuff gets suppressed because, Pfizer would rather you take like some SSRI or something or
yeah,
whatever it is, and you see it in cancer research, you see it in pretty much every field of
yeah.
medicine, basically. But then also with therapy, and that's really where I think with the psilocybin and ayahuasca or whatever comes about, it's going to help kind of change the narrative around these chemicals that we're putting into our body, and one of the things I remember from college, I was a psychology major, and I remember them saying that the a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, they don't really understand why these things work. Like they're just playing around with things, and so they're looking to suppress a certain symptom, or they're trying to make you happier, or they're trying to do this or that, and then they find something that does. But on a biological level, a lot of times they don't really know exactly what it's doing,
Right.
and it's like we're putting these chemicals in our body, and they're listing all these side effects, and a lot of times we're just killing ourselves through these chemicals, and so having these natural remedies, I think, is really going to change a lot. Because it's just a lot healthier, anything from the
Yeah.
ground is just, I'm a firm believer in it.
So it is it's interesting because if you actually go back and you look at like behind the scenes. So again, because I lived in the health insurance space for 30 years, I know it very well, and I know how disgusting it is. Like I literally walked away a couple months ago just in disgust. Like I couldn't do it anymore. But if you look, like, so there's a company called AbbVie. AbbVie is a Dutch pharmaceutical manufacturer company. They're the ones who created Humira. So now, if you the commercials, ask your doctor if Humira is right for me. They were charging $13,000 to $16,000 for a monthly supply of Humira, but I could go, and I did for a lot of my clients. I would actually have it sent from the Cayman Islands or the Bahamas for $3,000. So why is that? Because they all buy it in bulk on behalf of a country. So because they're part of the UK province, they negotiate drugs from a national, not a middleman like pharmaceutical PBM is what we call them, pharmaceutical benefit manager. So, but then if you start looking at like what has AbbVie done? AbbVie just made a huge investment in a small manufacturer of psychedelics called Gilgamesh. So they're buying into these companies, waiting to profit of it down the road, but they're hedging. The other one that you're seeing too is there's Johnson and Johnson has a small division that created a ketamine. It's very similar. It's a spray. If you actually go out and you look at the research, most ketamine therapists will tell you that I think it was like 95% will tell you that it doesn't work. It doesn't go with the RNA. It's another kind, 95%, but they prescribe it because it's covered by insurance. So it's the only one covered, and it's like 25 grand a year. So I'm going to give you a $25,000 a year drug that doesn't work, and I'm going to give you some coping skills. So that's what pharma does. Like and I love seeing pharma on the hot seat right now with all of the healthcare stuff that's going on.
Yeah, it's a real shame, that capitalism and greed are really taking over, the health space. And I feel
Yeah.
like, us here sitting talking today, we're trying to take it back to more holistic methods. I mean, even just when you look at, nutrition, when you go back and you focus on whole foods, you try to stay away from the processed foods, how much helpful that can be to people. And it's just a shame how money has really driven, healthcare, and really it's harming people. And these kind of practices with the MDMA and the ketamine, the LSD, and the mushrooms are really making such a huge impact on mental health. I remember when I was growing up, I'm 40, and when I was growing up, they had the DARE program, the DARE to stay off drugs. I don't know if you were. Oh, you're muted, Alan.
Oh, so
There you
yeah,
are.
so they have their own police cars. Remember the black and white police cars with deer on the
Yep.
red letters? And yeah, it was
Yeah.
yeah. So one thing that I always talk about. So we talk about capitalism and we talk about greed. If you look at capitalism in its truest form, it is an exchange of value. You give me something of value, I perceive it to be value, and I give you money, which is value to you. What we have right now is
Mhm.
not capitalism. It is greed through and through. There is zero value in what you get.
Yeah.
So I believe 100% if we were to truly go back and look at value and capitalism, I think it would be a completely different system because we would stop allowing people to take advantage of it. We would start
Yeah.
asking the hard questions.
Yeah. I think the
Just
biggest
as like a
detriment
whole,
is
just
the
bag of stuff.
size of these pharmaceutical companies. They've gotten so big and so powerful, and they have so many lobbies, in Washington. It's really a shame that they're keeping this stuff from us. And
Yeah, and
yeah.
and we're kind of seeing it right now with unfortunately, the shooting of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare,
Yeah, I
and
was gonna bring that up.
it's just insane where we're seeing it right now because I think the American people are finally saying, I think I heard a statistic: 41% are rooting for this guy. Like 41% of our country think he's a hero. To me, that's vigilante justice. Like I got into it
Yeah.
with somebody. I got into it with somebody on LinkedIn, and I shouldn't say I got into. Someone responded to a post of mine because I have a lot of followers on LinkedIn. I lived in the space for 30 years. Now I'm just trying to educate people of what they can do. This guy is like, well, he made a comment. I believe we should be able to kill all of them. Like, then where does it stop? Like, if I accidentally, you think I cut you off in traffic, and now you decide you just want to shoot me because
Kill them.
there
That's
is
it.
no line. There's no crossing of that line. But I
Yeah.
think we
It's
all agree
crazy.
that we're tired of getting screwed by the insurance company.
Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely something wrong, but going out and killing the CEO,
Yeah.
I don't think is the right way to go about it. Definitely not.
Right.
It
Yeah.
does show
Yeah.
the overall aggressiveness of people though, and it helps. I think it's going to help shift the focus a bit, because
Yeah.
a lot of times it does take a big event for people to realize like, all right, maybe this is a problem. And so there is hope of maybe some more, like regulations or things coming out and towards the insurance industries and stuff. I mean, going back to the psilocybin, I really think that things like that, if you go into holistic medicine and these natural remedies, it really helps people to understand the difference between what these companies are trying to sell us and what is already available, and that you could theoretically grow like at your
Yeah.
own house, and because that's really where a lot of times, and we grew up with it, like you said, the advertisements and so when people are sick, they a lot of times will automatically just go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes you everything. And we don't realize like the relationship between like the money that they're receiving. They're basically drug dealers.
Yeah.
And a lot
They're
of times they
free
really
drug
don't
dealers.
know what
Yes.
these drugs are doing. Like they
Yeah.
just know that it helps with whatever symptom that you're trying to, fix. And so my hope with psilocybin and this whole psychedelic research and stuff, and even with the killing of the CEO, is that we can start peeling back those layers of our economy and how we view these companies and stuff like that. Because I think that's big. We got to change the narrative. We need to start realizing that, just because they're a doctor, a lot of times like they're not making you healthier. Like they
No.
might make you
Well,
worse.
and that's the unintentional consequence of SSRIs. If you actually look, and I have a friend of mine who started a ketamine network. One of the side effects of SSRIs, suicidal thoughts. Like, so I'm already
Mm,
mentally unwell. I'm I'm already feeling frustrated. So my doctor's going to give me a drug that I can't sleep, and now I'm thinking about suicide because chances are I was already thinking about suicide. So it's like, where does it end? But again, this client this week, 20 years, same psychotherapist, same person, five different drugs over his last 20 years, and some of them were to help him sleep. And he's like, and I'm still not sleeping. He's like, so you find this a lot with a lot of people who are like really going down this road of mental health and this illness, and they're doing what they're supposed to be. They're going to see, and thank God they are. They're going to see people because there was a stigma around talking about this before. Like you're
mm.
now at least being able to say, yeah, I'm seeing a therapist, which is phenomenal, but we have to be able to start asking ourselves, is there more than what I'm being fed behind a counter of a pharmacy or a drugstore?
I mean, even
Definitely.
in the
Yeah.
therapy space, I mean, cognitive behavioral
Yeah,
therapy is mostly affiliated with the prescription of drugs,
yeah.
and so it's just suppressing those symptoms. And that's why earlier, I mentioned humanistic psychology because it's more interested in the long game, like
Mm,
you getting to be able to sit with yourself. Because that's what it's going to take, It's like, all right, so you're depressed. Like, yeah, I could give you Effexor or Lexapro or whatever, make you feel better, sure, but you're not fixing anything. Like the
right.
problem is still there. And so being able to sit with yourself and realize like, all right, I'm deeply unhappy in my situation, or I'm deeply unhappy with the decisions I'm making, or I'm deeply, feeling a certain way. And, it's just, I think, going back to the psychedelics, it's going to help us to reintegrate, like be cohesive, because having that internal congruency is really important,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I really, a lot of that is going to need to change as well, which along with the psilocybin, because that's from a cognitive behavioral approach, like you can focus on the behavioral therapy afterwards or the cognitive therapy. But it's going to take a little bit longer for people to be able to approach themselves because the
Correct.
psilocybin, it's not something that you can just, blame it on something. It's like, no, let's sit with that. Let's look at
Yeah.
it.
And I think you're starting to see a lot of those conversations around veterans. So as a veteran myself, and being a trauma survivor, this summer I was on Capitol Hill. I was talking to a lot of congressmen and senators trying to get the FDA to approve MDMA. So there was this really big education piece, and then the FDA didn't approve it. But now you have the VA actually announced like 2 weeks ago they're giving $1.5 million to do research for veterans with MDMA. So I think it's going to take bold people doing bold things that do not include violence. So shooting a CEO of anything it's one, we're going to forget about this guy in a month, and life will continue to move on. But it's how can we do that? How is it the long game? Or is it a combination of the long game and the short game with, having these conversations state by state with psilocybin? And I think it's just an uncomfortable conversation for people to have because, again, we talked about dare, talk about the Christian community. When I
Mm,
wrote my book, Walking in the Garden, I sat down with my pastor and we were talking about it. He goes, "That's very controversial." And yeah, it is. But you're never going to be able to create change if you're not worried about ruffling a few feathers, and at least be able to have the conversation like we're having today.
yeah, definitely. And trying to make a change, I think, is what we need, no disrespect to your client, but the definition of insanity is trying that you're doing the same thing over and expecting different results and taking those five pharmaceutical medications for all those years and
Mm.
expecting things to change, but not doing anything different to find that
Yeah.
is really powerful. And then looking
Yeah.
outside the box and looking at these psychedelics to find what you've been looking for, I think is really, really what we need.
Well, and it's if you actually go back and you look at history and Alcoholics Anonymous, for example. So Bill Wilson actually had his healing through LSD. We don't talk about that. Uh, he created the 12-step process through psychedelics, but we've
Wow.
basically whitewashed that, and most people don't know that. So
Hmm.
again, when I say LSD, what do you immediately think of? It's probably a negative connotation, like there, because just that's just how we're wired. But
Yeah.
just look at all the millions of people who have been transformed from the 12-step process. But his
Hmm.
12-step process included something else. So it's, again, it's really kind of going back and investigating why do we believe what we believe and then challenging the narrative.
Definitely. Are you guys familiar with The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, the book?
I am, I am, yes.
I
Mm-mm.
thought that would be something very interesting to bring up considering your background in
Sure. So
religion
I am. There's
and
actually quite a
the
number of
holidays coming
others.
up.
There is one called the psych. What's that? So
Oh, I was
there
just
was
saying,
another one
and
called the Psychedelic Gospels.
go for it, Alan.
So the Psychedelic Gospels was another one, a fascinating book because if you go back to creation, and again, I Bible college pastor, I know the Bible well. It doesn't tell you what kind of fruit or tree that it is. We assume like all the beautiful paintings are of apple.
Hmm.
It doesn't really tell us anything. Is it possible though that the tree of knowledge was psilocybin? Could it be? Could it be possible? So then, if you look at the psychedelic gospels, they go back and archaeologically they do all this homework, and then there's other incredible books called Soma. That talk about the red mushroom with the white dots that I love because Mario Kart, Super Mario, they all have a mushroom. Mushrooms are everywhere right now.
Mm.
It's almost like this. Surreal. Like I go to a store, I'm like, what the heck? Like it's everywhere, but nobody still wants to talk about it. But there's all these incredible books. Now, that one, he was a very, very well known, respected, and renowned scientist. He was
Hmm.
basically disbarred and called crazy.
Yeah.
He died broke. Uh, and you have to wonder like how much similarity is that guy to the people who are in, and I'm sure I'll ruffle some feathers when I say this, love RFK. Because right now
Yeah.
there's these two camps where I've heard from friends who have said, I support RFK and now my other friend will not talk to me. Like, what kind of
Yeah.
friend is that? But very polarizing book
Mm.
and very polarizing guy.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. For anyone who's not familiar with the sacred mushroom and the cross, in that book they talk about the mushroom and Amanita muscaria, is that how you say it?
Yeah. Manania mascara. Yeah.
So that's that
The
red
red mushroom with the white dots.
with the white dots. And
Yeah.
they're saying that's kind of where the history of Christmas came from, from these shamans delivering these mushrooms. And it's, I forget where, but it's somewhere where there's like a lot of snow and they'd be snowed in, and so the shaman would have to come down through the chimney to deliver them, and that's kind of where the
Hmm.
background of Christmas came from.
Wow.
And if you go look, we have a very psychedelic lineage, like we all do, with the exception of Antarctica. Every continent grows a form of a psychedelic mushroom. And they have
Interesting.
been part of our culture since the
Hmm.
very beginning of time. So we always think like, and this is the part I think that fascinates me to some degree with Christianity is we think that there was nothing before Christ and and after.
Yeah.
Most of the beliefs and traditions that we have, we hold dear from the dark ages of medieval times. Like, so
Mm.
what was good and bad, I always say is. Because if you go back long enough, what was bad is good and what is good is bad. Like, so
Right.
where's the frame of that? And then you kind of go back for thousands of years before Jesus ever walked the earth, indigenous tribes were using psychedelics. We were talking about the book The Cross, but there's another one that's called The Immortal Key. There was a secret society in Greece. Now, remember, the Greeks took over Israel and most of the continent before the Romans. So there was a secret society called the Illusion. The Illusion would take a fermented kind of a rice kind of a thing they call kikogen, I think that's what it's called, and had a secret society, and that's how they would all connect to God through psychedelics through this fermented barley, if you will, before
Hmm.
Jesus ever walked the earth.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and
That's
if you
pretty.
bring up DMT as well, I mean, DMT is
My favorite.
literally in everything,
Yeah,
it's what makes our dreams. They say when we die, a large dose of DMT is secreted into our brains.
yeah, and birth.
And I mean, that's the main ingredient in ayahuasca's.
Yeah.
And so we can see this like weaving of psychedelics throughout our life, and so
And
yeah,
DMT is
it's
in every living thing. So it is a connection. And, again, it's actually my favorite. It I had a bunch of friends over for dinner several months ago, and I did a DMT experience in my home. I don't recommend if you don't do this all the time, don't do it alone. Don't do things alone. I'm very good at what I do now. I know how to navigate my brain, and I did. I went in and I had the most incredible 7 minute experience that I thought was days. Like, I mean, it was just incredible. I died. I literally had a spiritual death and a rebirth.
Wow.
And I have a friend in Canada who's a facilitator, and I called her, and she had just done another one called Ibogaine. Ibogaine is in Africa, and she just did a
Hmm.
2 day, and there was like this cross message between both of us of this reclamation back to the earth, of coming back and bringing everything that was chemical back to earth, and making it more about those things than other things. So yeah, so.
yeah. Yeah, I remember Dratura from when I was young, and then there was one that was even it had grown in popularity for a while. It was at like all the smoke shops and stuff. Like you could smoke it, and it was like a psychedelic, where it was very short lasting. But I remember you just jumped right into it. You would have an experience, and then you would just jump right out.
That's
And
DMT. So DMT
um,
lasts like usually no more than 15 minutes, depending on.
yeah,
And then there's another one that's actually even stronger than DMT. It's called 5-MeO. It's the Sonoan toad. It's the poison from the toad. So you'll
wow,
hear people, I think you hear Joe Rogan talk about the toad, and that's what
Hmm.
it is. It's 5-MeO, which is, yeah, it's about the same
wow,
5 to 15 minutes or 7 to 15 minutes. And yeah, you're in a different plane.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
I wrote
And
about
then
all of these
there's.
in my book because when I decided that I wanted to move into the space, you have to know what each of them do and feel like. So you have to go and experience it. So it's
yeah.
yeah, they're amazing.
No,
Did
this was
you
an awesome conversation. We really touched on a lot of points. Yeah, this it was really cool sitting down with you today.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. And one of the things that I discovered kind of through all of this, we talked about serotonin. So the thing about these things is that you have these incredible serotonin and dopamine rushes, and that's where a lot of that rewiring comes. But I'll tell you what happens. What I typically would see a lot is that you crash. Like if you ever talk to somebody who goes to a rave with MDMA, like the next day you
Mm.
feel like garbage.
Shit.
It's like
Yeah,
you had this like crazy spike. So working with all of these people, I kept seeing the same symptoms. So I went back to a lab that I work with in DC. They're doing a lot with PTSD and the Air Force. And I created a brain health supplement I created it specifically for psychedelic therapy, but it actually works with TBI, with traumatic brain injuries, and it really reduces brain fog. So it was just kind of funny that it started off as an idea just to help my clients. And I had the idea, and it's called Neuma Hydrate. So again, Neuma is soul, spirit, breath. Uh, I took the idea back in May and I self-funded this whole project. I built a company and we just literally hit the fulfillment center like 2 weeks ago, and I'm rebranding and launching in January. So it's going to be like super amazing.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with that product. I mean, I've definitely experienced that down after doing
Yeah.
mushrooms, and I'm really excited to place an order and try some of that.
Awesome. It's my daily every morning brain health supplement. So what I found is that when 45% of Americans are dehydrated and they get brain fog. So you wake up in the morning and you
Mhm.
kind of like get that groggy feeling. It's the
Right.
very first thing I do. I throw it into 16 ounces of water and do it before I even work out. So I take AG1 for gut health and Numa for brain health. So
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, Brandon and I
And
are
you know,
actually working on
and I'd
a
love to give you
supplement.
and your listeners a discount. So we can talk about a code, and we'll talk after, and you can announce a 15% discount off of every order. So
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I
there you go.
appreciate that.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's call it Numa 15. So if your listeners want to give it a shot, we'll give you a discount code for Numa 15.
Awesome. And where can they purchase
Yeah,
the
it's
Neuma Hydrate?
www.numa.health.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
And we're just getting started. I mean, so hydrate was again, it was the thing that I saw that was the easiest low-hanging fruit. This year,
Hmm.
we're actually working on creating an app for a community. So if you're somebody who wants to look or is interested in psychedelics, kind of curated video content of what it is, what it isn't. And then if you are a facilitator, therapist, or somebody who wants to work with someone, I'm building the whole ecosystem. So you can do everything from a medical intake all the way through. We're getting ready to experience. It's all in an app. And then at the end of that, and we're going to be journaling back and forth, and we're integrating, and we're now working on the lessons you've learned. It's all going to be there, and it's agnostic. So you can work with anyone you want, and everyone gets to kind of dial in and be able to see what it is you're doing. And then um, my dream, the big dream, what kind of started this whole thing is genetics. So same lab down in DC, we've identified 7 genetic markers that everybody has that I believe will tell me which psychedelic therapy is actually better for you, which one metabolizes faster based on your genetics. So 3 to
Wow.
5 years is kind of the roadmap of where I'm wanting to take that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversation. We'll definitely have to have you back on. We didn't even get a chance to really get into health or employee benefits at all. The
All
psychedelic
right.
space is just so interesting.
Yeah. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, definitely. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap it up?
No, not at all. Just keep the conversation going. I tell everyone, challenge the narrative. Question why you believe what you believe to begin with, so
Hmm.
that you can actually move forward. Because one of the things you'll discover is that everything that we think about with good, bad, right, wrong, it always comes from somebody else's version. And for you to truly make an informed decision, you have to understand the history of why it was and where it is and who said it, and kind of make the decisions on your own. And that especially rings true with psychedelics, the therapy, and mental wellness.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm interested in doing more of a guided session with psychedelics to help deal with some past traumas and stuff. It's really
More than happy to
incredible.
point you in the right direction.
Definitely. We'll have to touch base offline and talk more about that. But if people want a guided session from you, where can they get in touch with
So
you?
I am all, I mean, if you Google my name, I'm literally everywhere. I spoke at Psychedelic Conference in Denver this year. I had a
Hmm.
pastor of a megachurch actually Google Christianity and psychedelics and came to see me speak. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me at Neuma Health. My blogs, I have a podcast called Neuma, The Crossroad of Science and Enlightenment, where we talk neuroscience, we talk science, spirituality, and psychedelic therapy.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Very cool. Well, thank you again. It was a pleasure.
absolutely.
And want to wish everyone a happy holidays and a safe new year. This will probably be our last
Absolutely.
episode of the year. possibly. And yeah, thanks for joining us, Brandon.
Yeah,
It
oh
was great
yeah,
to have
this
you
was
on.
amazing. This was a great
Definitely.
conversation.
Thanks, Brandon.
All
It was
right.
great talking.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.